Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg. I'm the publisher of Orbis Books, and I'm very glad to be joined today by our author, Cyprian Consiglio, to talk about his very new book, Epiphanies of Nature and Grace, 12 Meditations from a Life in Dialogue. Cyprian is a musician, he's a singer-songwriter, a Camaldolese Benedictine monk who recently was the prior of the Camaldolese Monastery in Big Sur. He's written a number of books, most recently with Orbis, Rediscovering the Divine, which we discussed in a previous conversation. And he's currently living in Rome, serving as Secretary General for Monastic Interreligious Dialogue. It's frankly a challenge to talk about this book, which is a collection of meditations, some of which originated as sermons or conferences for his monastic brethren. So they're not really like any sermons I've ever heard. Each of them has a particular theme, such as baptism, the Eucharist, vocation, hope, the church. All of these, however, are doorways into something much larger. What unites them all, more than the topics, I think, is the distinctive perspective and experience of the author, reflecting a unique blend of scripture scholarship, patristic theology, monastic wisdom, and the mystical traditions of both the West and Asia, including Hindu, Buddhist, and Taoist scriptures. And I think that integration of sources in reflecting on the Christian mystery is as much what this book is about as the specific topics of each meditation. As the subtitle indicates, they are all rooted in a life in dialogue. And so, Cyprian, by way of introduction, I wonder if you could explain that part of your subtitle, a life in dialogue, both personally and more generally as a spiritual path.
Sure. Thanks a lot. So good to be with you again. I guess at surface level, because I've been involved in comparative religion for well over 3 decades of my monastic life, that's the most obvious one. And it just becomes so natural for me to draw references and examples, both from, as you said, both from Western Christianity as well as from the Asian traditions. That comes to me as naturally as breathing. But the bigger topic of dialogue, I find, is a theme running through my life for many, many years. I just love being in dialogue with the world around me. I think, in music, I stretched out in so many different areas. Even in writing liturgical music, I was drawing in influences from gospel, from reggae music, from jazz, and then from West African music. So I just feel like there's so much around us that we can be enriched by outside of our own tiny little boxes. And probably at a third level of that, I think the phrase is used by Thomas Berry, but it comes in my mind in all capital letters, the great conversation. There's these great conversations happening among really enlightened people all over the world, people of goodwill all over the world. One of the things I love about the job I have now, interacting with people literally from all over the world almost every day, is I'm part of a much bigger conversation than I normally was part of living in the States. There's just so much excitement, and obviously much that we can offer, but even more importantly, so much that we can learn, so much that can expand our horizons of the world.
Well, you've actually spent quite a lot of time in India, and
Mhm.
you've been influenced by some of the great pioneers in
Mm.
interspiritual, interreligious dialogue, like Pete Griffiths, also a Camaldolese monk, Swami Abhishektananda, Raimon Panikar, coincidentally, maybe not coincidentally, all Orbis authors.
Yes.
So that's been part of your journey as well.
Huge part, yeah. And I even think of it in a sense kind of as a lineage, specifically because Bede, brought himself and the whole ashram of Shantivanam in South India into our congregation in the 1980s, and I got to meet him. So it's very much in line with my Camaldolese Benedictine tradition. But along with that, I was introduced into Abhishektananda, who was one of the first true founders of our ashram, and his thought from almost, yeah, the first few months that I was a monk. and he's buried at the ashram there at Shantivanam. And Panikar was also a close friend of our former prior father Bruno Barnhart, who was kind of an intellectual mentor of mine. So I really do feel like this is a lineage, at least an intellectual, spiritual lineage that I'm very happy to be a part of. Matter of fact, when I took this job, it was just a little over a year ago. I was introduced at the Abbots and Priors Congress from abbots and priors from all over the world. And one of the first things I said was, to introduce myself to these people who didn't know me. I consider myself very proudly to be in the lineage of Bede Griffiths and Abhishektananda.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that comes through in the book, and this dialogue is not just, as you say, with scriptural sources from various traditions, but is really a kind of openness to the true, the good, and the beautiful.
Yeah.
And the way that you connect that with in Christian theology, the idea of the Word, which was made flesh, and so that there's an entry both in religious traditions, but also just in in everyday life, and that might take us to the word Epiphanies. But maybe you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, and I didn't even realize how much I was influenced by Bede Griffiths on this too. But just to hawk our own wares, there's a whole chapter on this in Rediscovering the Divine about being open to beauty, truth, and goodness. That I found that exact quote that where Father Bede talks about that, and it's almost as if this book, Epiphanies of Nature and Grace, to say, "See, that's what I was talking about." Recognize wherever, there's beauty, truth, or goodness manifesting, that's already the second person of the Trinity manifesting, and we can follow that back to the source. It's a tremendous, not just hopeful, but even optimistic view of the world in that way. We wind up seeing beauty, we wind up seeing goodness, we wind up seeing truth in places we might not have noticed before. Again, I think this is something that somehow came to me naturally, something about my own upbringing that made it seem natural. But with folks like Bede Griffiths and Bruno Barnhart, really made it very intentional and specific in that way too. And especially when it comes to the truths of other religions, what's kind of fascinating about that, this is a theme that runs through Nostra Aetate and the whole new approach to interreligious dialogue that came about in the Second Vatican Council, to be able to look at another tradition and see what's true and good and beautiful there. And not only to recognize it, but to even promote it, even promote something good we see in another tradition. Most people don't even know anymore that those Nostra Aetate exists, this great declaration on interreligious dialogue. But if they were to read those words and really pay attention, it's startling in its openness. It's liberalism in the broadest sense of the word, its inclusivity.
Well, as I said, maybe that takes us to the word very important in your title, the keyword Epiphanies, Epiphanies of Nature and Grace. Talk a little bit about what that word means, how it functions for you.
I think of this phrase, I think it was Ken Wilber who said that, people are so funny when they say, "I had a dream." No, really a dream had you. Is an epiphany, I think of an epiphany as something that happens to us. This startling moment when suddenly a truth is revealed. Somebody was describing to me once a moment of meditation. He had been meditating for years and not feeling a whole lot of, if we can use the word, success or consolation from it. And then one day he said it was as if the rose bloomed. After all the years of effort, suddenly something reveals itself. And this is really important, I think, for Christian spirituality, the idea of grace. It happens from outside of us too. So, and there's another, this may be Wallace Stevens. It's not every day that the world reveals itself as a poem. There's something about the world revealing itself and truth revealing itself if we prepare ourselves, if we get ourselves ready for those things, for those surprises. Yeah, and in some way, every day there's an epiphany. Something reveals itself to me. The work I do is just to keep my eyes pure, to keep my mind clean and open in order to receive that revelation. And not only to receive it, but to somehow be able to let it transform me and transform the way I think and transform the way I speak as well.
Does a specific spiritual practice, such as in your case, meditation, silence, prayer, liturgy, uh, adapt you or equip you better to be prepared for these kinds of revelations, experiences?
Yeah, and thanks for putting all those together because I really like to connect, even silent meditation along with prayer and liturgy as well. But I do think specifically that practice of silent meditation, it's like I found from my own self, it was like the mineral that was missing in my diet. There's something about really cleansing that palate, letting go of all of our expectations and our ideas. Part of the brief rule of my congregation comes from St. Ramiel. It's translated in English in this way anyway, is empty yourself completely and sit waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Even in our prayer, we're so loaded with expectations, we're so loaded with prejudices, we're so loaded with our own projects going on. But to really let go of all that and empty ourselves completely, trusting that the divine is that benevolent, that if there's that emptiness, that God's going to fill it with something else and something, yeah, of God's own, something divine. But yeah, I think it's specifically that practice of silent meditation that prepares us for those epiphanies and revelations.
Do you think that those, are in many cases people have those kind of manifestations of the divine or ultimate reality or something? And in some cases, that points them in the direction of a vocation, or if they feel a sense of calling, they live out of that experience, this sort of Shaktipat, I guess you might say, in the Eastern tradition,
Yeah.
that colors the rest of their lives, And then in other
Yeah.
cases, maybe we have those sort of moments and then we forget
Wait.
about them, and the challenge is to try to if you experienced, okay, this is the truth, to
Yeah.
remember that and to live out of that. That's a challenge sometimes.
Yeah, and there's another teaching I was actually alluding to it a moment ago, and this also may come from Ken Wilber. He articulated so many of these things so well. Like a revelation can come at any moment in our lives, but the health of the receptor, the health of the person who's receiving it is going to determine, first of all, if you even catch it.
Mhm.
Second of all, is it going to transform you? Is going to determine also how you're going to understand it and
Mhm.
then how you're going to pass it on. Like all those things are involved somehow. First of all, receiving the experience, letting the experience
Mhm.
sink in and transform you, like, the seed that falls on good ground,
Mhm.
how you're going to understand and articulate it. That's going to be so loaded with cultural significance as well. And then how you're going to pass it on too. And
Mhm.
I think that's a pretty brilliant teaching on that.
I think there's, a lot of times, yeah, where it's sort of in the eye of the beholder, and other people might not see anything at all. And you think of
Mm.
all the people who encountered Jesus and even
Yeah.
touched him or handled him or whatever like that. They didn't see anything very special. I had a
Mm.
friend, a very dear friend, who was a very holy woman. And when she died at her memorial service, out of this blue, empty sky, not a cloud in the sky, this rainbow appeared. And her husband was a scientist and very, very kind of skeptical. And I said, well, what do you think of that? And he said, she'll have to do better than that. But it doesn't mean necessarily that we were all, changed by that. But for instance, you refer to the famous story of Thomas Merton at Fourth and Walnut, where he
Yeah.
has this kind of epiphany. Definitely, people describe it as that, where he's walking down the street in the middle of the street, suddenly sees that he loves all these people. They're no more
Yeah.
strangers. And he said it
Yeah.
was like waking from a dream of separateness. And
Yeah.
if we could only see each other like this all the time, they're like walking
Yeah.
around shining like the sun. And it
Yeah.
seemed like that did it it shifted him in a very important way. And his monastic vocation at that time, which before that had been more kind of otherworldly and ascetic and withdrawing from the world, became an entry into engagement and solidarity with the world
It stays with
and
from that
openness to other religions, other religious traditions.
spurious illusion of a separate holy existence is something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's great. Well, you have, and I think it's my favorite chapter really was the very first one, Holy and Enlightened.
Yeah.
Um, and it seemed like that was kind of your manifesto or your credo of what you see as kind of integrating the way of compassion and love and the way of wisdom and enlightenment and
Yeah.
how those come together. Am I right
Yeah.
about
And
that? You think?
yeah, and it's so interesting. I just was at a big meeting here in North Italy of Monastic Interreligious Dialogue, the Italian branch, but we were together with Buddhist and Hindu monks at a Hindu ashram, a Hindu monastic community in Italy, which was a mind-blowing experience in and of itself. And I was reflecting a lot on this holiness and enlightenment thing, partially because the monastic community there is very well steeped in their own philosophy as well as their theology. They had a very devotional aspect to them as well, but they were very well steeped in their own, especially their philosophy, which is one of those things that's fascinated me for all these years too. And I was even thinking to myself this phrase that I don't think I've thought of before. My own spirituality tends to be, I want to say, even more philosophical than devotional, but at least as philosophical as devotional. Like there's a
Mhm.
special entryway in the Indian tradition. We talk about bhakti, karma, and dhyana, which would be the way of devotion, the way of action, and the way of knowledge. And those are all three legitimate paths to God, how God speaks to us and how we go to God. And I think that's one of the big attractions for me of the Asian traditions is we talk so much at the dhyana level, but the knowledge level is not just, certainly it can be abstract, but it's usually not just abstract. It's really trying to make sense of the phenomena of the experience of transformation.
Mhm.
Like, what does this really mean about, I would call it anthropology? What does this mean about absolute reality that we've had this experience? Those are the kind of conversations that I really love, and something I've actually been working on in a retreat I've been giving on meditation lately. Let's talk about what's really going on in the human person. What's our understanding of absolute reality? And how does that affect how we live in the world today? Um, I sometimes want to say I envy my Sicilian grandmother, whose faith was very, very simple. It was praying the rosary in the back of church, and she believed in God, and it was very faithful. But I don't have that kind of simple devotional faith. My faith would go as much through the philosophical, through the knowledge way, as it would through the devotional way. Though, as you said, as you noted, very, very attached to the, sorry, that helicopter going by, excuse me. I'm very attached to the liturgical tradition of the church, which may not be totally on a devotional level. That's, especially in the monastic tradition, is very connected to the teachings of the church, but also the cycle of the church year, and especially very attached to the scriptures as well. Did that get anywhere near answering your question?
Yeah, I think so. I like the last line of that chapter where you said, "What I'm looking for in my own life and in others is the marriage of wisdom and compassion." And
Yeah,
wisdom is obviously a lot more than just knowledge and learning.
yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of what you've read.
Yeah, we were somebody was quoting at this meeting the other day, and they said it was not an easy connection to make. Martin Luther King's line about love without strength and strength without love. Do
Mm,
you know this quote?
mm.
Love without strength is anemic, but strength without love is abusive.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I was thinking it's something along the lines of compassion and wisdom, to me, at least as I understand them. Compassion without wisdom somehow doesn't have enough container to it. It can't focus itself quite as much. But wisdom without compassion is very dry, is very dry. And I think part of the work I've done, especially in retreat work, along with the writing, is to try to raise that wisdom level a little bit too.
Hmm. Hmm.
And hopefully,
Another meditation that I really enjoyed was on the grace of carnality, where you
yeah,
begin by talking about Mary and the kind of metaphor of Mary as the ark of the new covenant.
yeah,
But that leads you into just a whole different, deeper kind of meditation on embodiment and the body as a site of transformation. So much of Christian spirituality has tended to denigrate the body,
Yeah.
and yet you sort of say, well, that's like one of the best things about Christianity
Yeah.
is this idea that the Word, became flesh.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, one of the great gifts for me, especially of the dialogue with the East, the gifts I've gotten from the East, whereas I usually say Buddhists taught me how to meditate, it's India that taught me that my body was a temple.
Yes,
It
yeah, right.
wasn't third grade at St. Andrew's Grade School in Romaville, Illinois. It was the yogis who taught me that this is the place that it happens, and how I treat my body is going to affect my spiritual health as well. And the more you think about it, the more it should be just so obvious that this should be a Christian virtue, even a Christian monastic practice, to have some kind of bodily practice along the way too, because we believe not only that the body is a vehicle, but even that the body is what gets transformed. I mean, that's the transfiguration, the resurrection, and even the ascension are somehow all about that the body doesn't just get cast off like a banana peel. But I tell you what, this is convincing people of the value of silent meditation is already a high hill to climb, because it's so people here in Rome are so suspicious of it, for instance. But this second one is even harder, of trying to say that like somehow bodily practices ought to be a part of our practical spirituality. And I mean bodily practices besides fasting and whipping yourself and wearing glass in your
Right.
shoes, like positive bodily practices.
Well, I really like the opening of that meditation where you say that Mary, it all sort of, we talk about the Word became flesh and dwelled among us, but beginning with Mary, so open to the Word that it took root inside of her, and like a seed, and you said in the garden of her womb, and became flesh, became a baby.
Yeah.
And what that tells us about, our own calling to give birth to the divine, in our lives, Meister Eckhart said.
It was just the gospel yesterday, in Luke, where they tell Jesus, your brother and your brothers and your mother are here, and Jesus says, "This is my mother and my brothers and my sisters. Whoever hears the word of God and keeps it is my
Yeah,
mother, my brother, my sister." And that's not just an allegory. I
yeah.
mean, that's the real thing somehow.
What about the reflection on hope? I also really like that. There was some great,
My favorite one.
great. One I would like to share with my father, who said he was not a person of faith, but he was a person of hope, and I think he would have really understood what you're talking here about hope is not what
Mhm.
it's not and what it is.
Mm. Yeah, that's my favorite one too, and I've given that as a talk in various forms along the way. My favorite one there is the Cornel West quote, because that essay is basically just me weaving together everybody else's quotes.
I'm a
But
prisoner of hope.
I mean, but he also says I'm a blues man,
Yeah,
So
right.
I
Well,
dive for
not all
that.
of us are bluesmen, but I like
Yeah.
the prisoner of hope thing.
Well, and these days I watch the news every morning, fortunately or unfortunately, and seeing it from Italy and from the Italian perspective. It's pretty rough. It's pretty
Yeah,
rough out there. Pretty rough out there, and on so many different levels. I mean, while we're speaking, things are raging right now on the Gaza Strip, apparently, and there's this big tussle between Israel and the U.S. and the rest of the world about the state of Palestine. Obviously, what's ever going on with Russia now, and the drones over Europe and Ukraine, besides all the other weird and wonderful things happening in the world. It's hard. It's actually hard to be a prisoner of hope.
yeah.
There's something in me that refuses to give up and makes me still get up in the morning and do the work that I do. And I feel like the job I have right now is my little way of contributing to that, of pushing the energy in an opposite direction. But it's hard sometimes to believe that there's actually directionality and intentionality about this, and that God will be all in all in the end. It's not the easiest thing in the world. And part of that is a commitment. Part of that is not always a feeling. It's a commitment too, just like love itself is.
It's like Dorothy
I'm
Day.
also
Yeah,
leaning back on that advice I got from the Jesuit years ago, that hope is a seed that never dies.
yeah.
It can get buried and crushed, but it never really dies.
No, I you talk about it as an energy. You just said that, and that really struck me too. That it's not just a feeling, it's
Yeah,
something that empowers you to do something.
yeah.
Without that, you're not going to do anything. You'd give up. And
And
so
probably
anything that
sits right
happens is
next to that great
because of
drive
hope.
to live that, sorry, probably sits right next to that great drive to live that we have inside of us, that drive to survive.
Yeah, I love the quote also from Havel, the great dissident who became president of Czechoslovakia, who said, "Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the
Mm,
certainty that something makes sense,
yeah,
regardless of how it turns out."
yeah,
So it's a kind of inoculation against, the apparent failure and sense of
yeah,
despair that lets us give up, but the sense that there's a meaning in all this,
yeah.
and to attach ourselves to that rather than the immediate outcomes.
And also that's the decision that we make every day too. Yeah, like love.
The Toward the end of the one of the last meditations, you describe sharing a bus ride with a Muslim scientist from Iran, who said that very soon when he meets people, he likes to ask them, "What's the meaning of life for you?"
Yeah.
And I wondered how you answered him if he asked you that question.
How did I answer him?
You can answer it now if you want.
I can answer it now. Do you know, my first thought is, and maybe this is what I said to him as well, um, is greater and greater connectivity, and also a greater and greater connectivity at a deeper and more subtle level as well. For me, that's it. It's that great, there's a great image of the like a forest of aspen trees. Is
Yeah,
like they're really all one tree.
yeah, that's right.
They look separate somehow. And if we dig deeper and deeper and deeper, even into our own, I'm going to use the word soul here, but you might want to use the word psyche. We're actually going to find that deposit of communion within us too,
Mhm.
even the collective unconscious that we share. And I think this is one of those things where science and spirituality are also coming together. I've been reading this amazing guy named Federico Faggin, who was the inventor of the microchip and the touchpad, and also has now devoted the last over 30 years to the study of consciousness and quantum physics. And what he's revealed, this book is actually called, Where Science and Spirituality Meet, just keeps revealing these deeper and deeper and deeper levels of connectivity that are actually a part of our own selves as well. So if, yeah, I would say at this moment, I would describe the meaning of life as greater and greater connectivity.
I think that goes, back to the theme of epiphany too, because when if this manifestation of the divine or of kind of ultimate reality, in so many forms comes back to that experience of Merton of
Yeah.
awakening from separateness, that we're all they're no strangers,
And
and that yeah.
that's
Go ahead.
that's one of those epiphanies. If I can recite something of a litany, even in the process of the interior journey of meditation, going deeper and deeper into my own consciousness and subconsciousness and unconsciousness, making the journey to the bottom of the soul, hoping in the end either to return to God or to achieve union with God somehow. This is a big monastic thing, achieving union with God, or later to be one with God in heaven, when in reality, God has been with me and within me all along. There's the great epiphany. And I have been in God, as Paul says in the letter to in the Acts of the Apostles, in whom we live and move and have our being. Like I don't, even union with God isn't something I have to achieve. it's something I have to realize. It's an epiphany. It's an epiphany that happens.
Well, thank you very much, Cyprian. What a pleasure to always to talk with you. And I think that, as I said, it's hard to kind of go topic by topic because that's not really what the book is about. It's about a kind of invitation to a life in dialogue, not just with other religions, but with the divine, and that we experience not just when we're silent or in meditation, but just in everyday life and our encounters with people, and going deeply into our own consciousness and hearts. And I think that people can get a sense that this is not a book to just read from cover to cover. These are really meditations it's almost like a retreat. And the experience of reading this book is just to kind of sit at the feet of a great teacher, a great spiritual master. I think I can say, you don't have to say that. And I hope that people will read this book, a wonderful book by Cyprian Consiglio, Epiphanies of Nature and Grace, 12 Meditations from a Life in Dialogue. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.